Meet Savorista. They have premium craft decaf and half-calf coffee with bold, rich flavor. Made from high-altitude, hand-picked Arabica beans and naturally decaffeinated with water or sugarcane processes, and there's no harsh chemicals.
But if you think chocolate, caramel, citrus, even bourbon pecan and mint and mocha, it's small batch roasted, literally so good, customers call it the best decaf they've ever tried.
Better sleep, less anxiety, all the flavor. Use our code INFOGO to get 25% off at checkout at savorista.com. You can also find that link in the show notes. Hey, William, do you love craft beer?
Yes, I do. We
If you're
could,
looking for the perfect gift for a beer lover or just want to show off your brewery pride, the Harpoon Shop has something you won't find anywhere else.
and here's something special just for our listeners. You can save 25% off just by using our code INFOGO at checkout. You can find that link in the show notes. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William.
And I'm
Uh,
Kat,
and that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity with every show.
So, Kat, have you ever drank something called tea?
Almost every day.
You
I
know,
love
I
tea. All
I do
kinds of tea.
I do too. I really love tea. I love green tea. I love Earl Grey tea. I know you've seen me put my little tea bags in the water bottles and let them seep in the break room.
I have seen that. Do you put sugar in it or do you just drink unsweet tea?
I used to load that bad boy up with sugar back in the day until I hit my 50s. And then I was like, yeah. Now my wife's like, no.
I guess she might like you a little bit if she wants to keep you around and stuff. Trying to keep you healthy or something.
Have you ever heard of the sweet tea line in the United States?
Yeah. And the sweet tea line is a cultural divide in the US for those that don't know. It generally marks the boundary between regions where sweet tea is the norm and regions where it's not, which is so funny because I grew up in my early years from like 10 years old and before that where we had unsweet tea. Like my nana always had one of those, and I don't think we have few 7-Elevens here, but they have a very large cup, and she used to have one of those full of unsweet tea.
I grew up in the South where sweet tea with like tons of sugar was like the thing, right?
Mhm.
But as I've gotten older, I've kind of gotten away from that. Anyway, let's move on. The Mason-Dixon line, and I know we've done that somewhere down somewhere. This is a historical border. It's more, well, thought of as a cultural line more than the Mason-Dixon line because, well, it divides the sweet tea and unsweet tea parts of the United States.
It essentially divides the country into areas where iced tea is typically served sweet and areas where it is unsweetened, or the server will ask if you want it sweet or unsweet.
Sweet or unsweet. You know what? Adding that sweet and low in unsweet tea is not the same as putting sugar in it when it's hot.
Yeah, no, it's not.
I have come to really enjoy unsweet tea, to be honest with you.
It isn't all that bad.
I actually kind of like it. I mean, when I was younger, the more sugar, the better. Now that I'm older, it's like, I kind of really like my green tea green and
Mhm.
my unsweet tea unsweet, maybe.
Yeah, I I make chai tea, and I make chai tea like you'd make sweet tea traditionally. So I'm still into real sweet tea. Maybe I'll get to unsweet tea one day.
Maybe one day. But what are we talking about on this episode? It's the Boston Tea Party of 1773.
Before we get into the Boston Tea Party, we just need to explain how important tea really was back in the day.
Tea was important for several reasons at the time.
Culturally, it was a daily staple in colonial life and a symbol of British identity and social ritual, and people enjoyed it across all classes. Economically, the tea trade was highly profitable, with the British East India Company depending on the tea sales for financial stability and the colonies representing a major market. Additionally, tea taxes contributed to Britain's revenue, especially after expensive wars. And politically, tea became a powerful symbol of British control and colonial resistance.
So when Parliament taxed tea, they weren't just messing with a beverage, right? They were messing with the women who brewed it. Across the American colonies, women took center stage in one of the most powerful acts of resistance, the boycott of British tea. And they didn't just participate, they led it. At the heart of the movement were the Daughters of Liberty. And you know, this was a determined network of patriot women who transformed their homes into hubs of revolution. These women understood something crucial. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was a daily ritual, a symbol of comfort, a staple of social life. And if they could reject it, they could shake the foundations of the British economic control.
And reject it they did. Colonial women turned their backs on imported tea and brewed their own Liberty teas from native plants like raspberry leaves, mint, and Labrador tea. These homemade blends weren't just clever substitutions, they were bold political statements, and every cup served was a declaration of independence. Every sip a quiet act of rebellion. But the resistance didn't stop at the teapot. Women organized spinning bees to produce homespun cloth, replacing British textiles. They hosted gatherings to share herbal recipes and rally support. They wrote letters, published poems, and used their voices to stir patriot sentiment.
Homemade blends of teas. I wonder if they were using dandelions.
Could be. If they were using raspberry and mint, they had to have been using dandelions too.
Okay, go rock on, colonial women. Save the bees.
Save the bees, daughters of liberty.
Yeah. Oh, wow. We should make a t-shirt.
Yes, I can do that.
But their influence rippled throughout households and communities, keeping the boycott alive when, well, enthusiasm might have waned. Some women, like Sarah Bradley Fulton, went even further because she helped plan the Boston Tea Party and is said to have suggested the iconic Mohawk disguises. Others, like Abigail Adams and Marcy Otis Warren, well, they wielded their pens to inspire action and shape revolutionary thought. These women weren't just supporting the cause, they were shaping it. In a world that denied them formal political power, colonial women found their strength in everyday situations. I say we should do a whole episode on colonial women somewhere down the line.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay,
I appreciate that.
I'm down.
So they really turned domestic life into a battlefield of ideas, proving that resistance could be brewed in a teacup and stitched into a flag. That's really powerful. Sorry, I get emotional.
You're good.
Their defiance helped fuel a revolution, and their legacy steeped far beyond 1776. During this time, tea was more than just a beverage. It became a symbol of power, protest, and identity, playing a central role in the growing unrest that led to the American Revolution. So, why do Americans drink more coffee than tea now? When the American colonies were forming, tea was popular due to British influence. But the Boston Tea Party in 1773, a protest against British taxes on tea, made it somewhat politically unpopular.
Therefore, drinking coffee became a symbol of American independence and, well, resistance against the British rule. So, the Boston Tea Party was a pivotal event leading to the American Revolution, and this took place on the night of December 16th, 1773. In a bold act of defiance, a group of American colonists, many of them members of, well, a secretive resistance organization known as the Sons of Liberty. They disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians to, well, conceal their identities because, the consequences were pretty dire.
Mhm.
And they boarded three British ships docked at the Boston harbor, the Dartmouth, Eleanor, and the Beaver. And they proceeded to dump 342 chests of tea, and it would be of valued approximately in $2 million in today's currency, and they dumped this in the harbor's water. This dramatic protest was a direct response to the Tea Act passed by British Parliament earlier that year.
The act granted the financially struggling British East India Company exclusive rights to export tea directly to colonies, bypassing colonial merchants and effectively creating a monopoly. Although the Tea Act actually lowered the price of tea, it was seen by the colonists as a dangerous precedent, one that allowed Britain to impose taxes without any form of colonial representation in Parliament. This principle was summed up in the popular slogan, "No taxation without representation."
I think we've all heard that, right?
Yes,
But today we're still taxed with, well, it depends on really where you live and how you view it. There's taxes on every freaking thing now. Mm,
everything.
everything.
Where tax when we get paid, we pay sales tax, we pay taxes on our property, we
The air that
on
I
top of the
breathe.
on top of the interest that you pay for your mortgage. I mean, it's just insane. What
Agreed.
interest is a whole other oof.
Okay. We'll put it to the shopping list, interest and compound interest.
Yes. The Boston Tea Party escalated tensions between Britain and its American colonies, leading Parliament to enact the coercive acts known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts, which further restricted colonial autonomy and punished Massachusetts.
These harsh measures galvanized colonial resistance and it helped unify the colonies. And really, it led to contributing to the convening of the First Continental Congress in 1774. And it set the stage for the outbreak of the Revolutionary War in 1775. The event we now call as the Boston Tea Party, well, it was originally referred to as the destruction of tea, a name by contemporaries who witnessed or chronicled the incident. It really wasn't until like the 19th century that the term Boston Tea Party became, well, popular. By then, the event had gained legendary status in the American memory, and the new moniker, well, it really helped solidify its place as a symbolic and foundational moment in the fight for independence. So I say, factoid.
Factoid. The phrase cleverly encapsulated key elements: Boston, the site of the event; tea, the controversial commodity at the heart of the protest; and party. A somewhat ironic reference to the spirited act of rebellion carried out by the colonists. I agree. I approve this message.
I-
Anyway,
Save the tea. Oh, wait. No, no, no. Our battle cry is save the bees. My bad. You keep
right,
going.
save the bees, no taxation without representation. That is our battle cry, okay?
So we don't have to pay tax on honey. Got it.
No. The bees just it's a if we were to live symbiotically with the environment, I think we'd all be fine. But you
Mm.
know, this is just the world I live in it. Okay. The Boston Tea Party arose from two deep-rooted and escalating challenges faced by the British Empire in the 18th century. Oh no. First was the financial instability of the British East India Company, which, despite being one of the largest commercial enterprises of the time, was teetering on the edge of collapse.
And Parliament's response to all of this, well, it was the Tea Act of 1773. And it was really designed to bail out the company by a monopoly of tea sales to the American colonies. This not only threatened colonial merchants, but it also reignited outrage over Britain's continued taxation without representation. And second, and more fundamentally, the event reflected a growing dispute over the constitutional limits of British authority in the American colonies. So the colonists, well, they started to question whether Parliament had the legal right to govern and tax them without their direct, well, elected representation, a principle that would lay at the heart of the colonial resistance movement.
The North Ministry's efforts to assert imperial control over economic legislation, such as the Tea Act, triggered a confrontation that deepened the divide between Britain and its American colonies. You don't say. This confrontation would continue to fuel unrest and become a central grievance throughout the Revolutionary era. The Boston Tea Party, in particular, galvanized colonial opposition and directly led to punitive measures from Britain, known as the Coercive or Intolerable Acts, which in turn accelerated the path to open revolution. The conflict culminated in a revolutionary war and eventually in the formation of the United States as an independent nation.
So, Kat, the Boston Tea Party was not the first time that the colonists had organized against tax resistance, right?
Mhm.
Because that distinction really belongs to the lesser known Pine Tree Riot of April of 1772. And in that episode, colonists rose up against British imposed fines for, well, harvesting white pines. The Crown had reserved those pines for the Royal Navy.
Like the Tea Party, the Pine Tree Riot was fueled by resentment of overreaching imperial authority and set a precedent for civil disobedience against British rule. As tea became a favored beverage in Europe during the 17th century, several rival trading companies emerged to satisfy growing demand. These companies competed to import tea from China, which was then under the rule of the Qing dynasty.
In 1698, the English Parliament granted the East India Company, well, exclusive rights to import tea to England. And, well, this established a monopoly that would shape global trade for decades. And by the early 18th century, tea consumption had spread to Britain's American colonies. And this really prompted Parliament in 1721 to pass laws mandating that colonists, well, could import tea only from Great Britain. This move was designed to eliminate foreign competition, especially from Dutch traders.
However, the East India Company itself did not ship tea directly to the colonies. Instead, the company sold tea wholesale at auctions in England. British merchants purchased the tea, exported it across the Atlantic, and dispersed it to colonial ports such as Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. Until 1767, the East India Company paid a 25% ad valorem tax on all tea imported into Britain, in addition to other domestic duties imposed by Parliament.
So these high taxes, well, they made legal British tea expensive. And honestly and truly, when you compare this to tea imported from the Dutch Republic, their tea really faced little to no taxation. As a result, both the British and the American colonists, well, they kind of turned to the cheaper smuggled Dutch tea. And by the 1760s, well, the East India Company was losing an estimated 400,000 euro per year just from smugglers in Britain alone. Just to break that down, that would be roughly around $100 billion today. Imagine how that went over.
Oof.
Not too good.
Right. And so long before the Boston Tea Party turned tea into a symbol of rebellion, smuggling tea was a widespread and deeply entrenched practice throughout the American colonies. Colonists were well aware that British imposed taxes and import duties made legally imported tea significantly more expensive than alternatives brought in through unofficial channels. To avoid these costs, many turned to the black market.
And thus, Dutch merchants were among the most prominent smugglers. They supplied large quantities of tea that bypassed British customs. And Dutch tea was not only cheaper, but also readily available, making it the preferred choice for many colonists. This created a shadow economy where illegal trade thrived alongside legal commerce. It was really undermining British authority and exposing cracks in the imperial control. Sounds like Star Wars to me.
The empire. That's funny.
Yeah.
The smuggling networks were complex and well organized, involving colonial merchants, ship captains, dock workers, and even some local officials who turned a blind eye or actively participated. And so these underground channels allowed colonists to access tea and other goods without paying the taxes imposed by Parliament, effectively weakening British economic policies. More than just a matter of cost savings, Smuggling became an act of subtle resistance, signaling colonial frustration with British interference in their economic freedom.
Kat, before we go any further, I think we should take a small break.
Okie doke.
Green tea.
Ooh, chai tea.
We'll be right back. Now that we're back, this really fostered a sense of shared identity.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, listen up, all of my workforce friends out there, whether you're ranchers, farmers, or you just need a pair of good leather gloves, look no further than Bare Knuckles, the best leather gloves ever made, featuring a patent design crafted for natural curve of the fingers. These gloves deliver a perfect fit, superior protection, and all-day comfort. Made from premium leather, right now get an exclusive 15% off, and you can find that at buybareknuckles.com, but make sure you use our code INFOGO at checkout. You can find that link in the show notes. Upgrade your hands, and remember, every purchase, well, it supports the show, so thank you.
If you love unforgettable treats, you've got to try Molly B's gourmet cookies. These aren't your average cookies. Molly B's brings bold, artisan crafted cookies straight to your pantry. We're talking chocolate, cherry, and amaretto and be cordial. Earl Grey, lavender, white chocolate, and lemon glaze in the tea. Even maple, bacon, whiskey, and white chocolate in the Boss Man. Founded by a single mom from Alaska, Molly Bees has become a national sensation. You get 10% off any product using our code INFOGO at mollybees.com. Find the link in the show notes.
And cooperation among desperate colonial communities, as well, they collectively defied imperial laws. This illicit trade, well, it would also help build the logistical and social networks that would later help organize protest against British taxation. For example, coordination among merchants and townspeople in smuggling operations really laid the groundwork for the collective action seen in events like, well, the Boston Tea Party of 1773.
In short, tea smuggling was not just a way to avoid taxes. It was a key form of early colonial defiance that chipped away at British authority and helped unify the colonies in their resistance. It highlighted a contested nature of imperial control and set the stage for more overt revolutionary actions to come. In the American colonies, Dutch tea was also being illicitly brought in large quantities, undermining legal trade.
In an effort to make British tea more competitive and restore financial stability, to, well, the East India Company, Parliament passed the Indemnity Act of 1767. This law lowered the tax on tea consumed within Great Britain and refunded the 25% duty on tea that was, well, re exported to the colonies. To compensate for the resulting loss in government revenue, Parliament also enacted the Townshend Revenue Act of 1767, which imposed a new import duties on a range of goods, including tea to, well, you guessed it, the American colonies.
The Townshend Acts represented a turning point in colonial British relations. For the first time, Parliament was explicitly seeking to raise revenue from the colonies without their consent. This incited fierce opposition from many colonists, particularly those aligned with the emerging patriot movement, known as American Wings. They argued that taxation without representation was unconstitutional.
While the British government insisted that Parliament had full authority over the colonies, the colonists contended that only their own elected assemblies had the legal right to, well, levy taxes. And this fundamental disagreement sparked widespread protest. After the earlier Stamp Act, which was repealed in 1766 due to a similar unrest, Parliament issued the Parliament issued the Declaratory Act, reaffirming its right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. But the Townshend duties reignited tensions. In response, colonial merchants, well, they coordinated a non importation agreement, vowing not to import British goods. And many colonists joined in by boycotting taxed British tea. And activists, well, they promoted local alternatives like Labrador tea, especially from New England.
Despite these efforts, smuggling remained rampant, particularly in ports like New York and Philadelphia, where illegal trade had long been entrenched. In Boston, however, British tea continued to be legally imported, especially by firms connected to the royal officials, including Richard Clark and his sons, Governor Thomas Hutchinson. Eventually, political pressure from Massachusetts Whigs compelled even these loyalist merchants to cease legal imports and comply with the boycott.
By 1770, Parliament decided to repeal most of the Townshend duties in, well, response to the colonists' unrest. But crucially, they retained the tea tax. Prime Minister Lord North insisted on keeping the tea duty, well, as a symbolic assertion of Britain's right to tax the colonies. This partial repeal, well, it was really enough to end the non importation movement by October 1770. But between 1771 and 1773, legal British tea began flowing once again to the colonial markets, with merchants paying the remaining duty of the 3 pence per pound.
Boston became the largest importer of legal tea during this period, while smuggling still dominated in other cities. Tensions continued to simmer, of course. One flashpoint was the Gaspee Affair of 1772, in which Rhode Island colonists boarded, looted, and burned the British naval schooner Gaspee, which had been enforcing customs regulations off the coast of Newport. This bold attack on a royal vessel signaled a new level of colonial defiance and further strained relations between Britain and its American colonies.
And by 1772, Indemnity Act of 1767, which had allowed the East India Company to receive tax refunds on tea re-exported to the American colonies, well, it had expired. A new act, well, it reduced these refunds and restored domestic tea taxes in Britain, which rose tea prices, and this caused sales to collapse. And the company, already weakened by a famine-induced revenue crisis in Bengal, well, it was left with massive unsold tea on the brink of bankruptcy. So, to rescue the company, Parliament passed the Tea Act of 1773.
And this law reinstated full tax refunds on tea imported into Britain and, for the first time, allowed the East India Company to export tea directly to the colonies, cutting out middlemen and slashing prices. Though the tea was now cheaper than smuggled Dutch tea, the 3 pence Townshend tax on colonial imports remained. The North Ministry retained this tax to fund colonial governors and judges' salaries, ensuring their loyalty to Britain.
So while some warned this would provoke colonial backlash, Lord North, well, he refused to remove the tax. The company tried to conceal the tax by, well, adjusting how and where it was paid. But these efforts failed, and the Tea Act authorized the shipment of 5,000 chests, which are roughly 250 tons of tea, to major colonial ports. But colonial merchants, they were excluded from the new supply chain, and they saw this as an attack on their businesses.
Though the tea was cheaper, colonists viewed the act as a ploy to make them accept taxation without representation, sparking widespread resistance that would culminate in the Boston Tea Party. In September and October of 1773, 7 ships carrying over 600,000 pounds of East India Company tea sailed for the American colonies. News of the Tea Act sparked widespread protests led by the Whigs, or Sons of Liberty, who pressured appointed tea consignees to resign.
Though the Tea Act lowered the price of legal tea, colonists opposed it due to the issue like taxation without representation and fears of British monopolies and concerns over Parliament asserting authority. Well, in New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston, the resistance, well, it succeeded. Consignees resigned, and tea was either returned to England or confiscated.
Mm-mm-mm. But in Boston, Governor Hutchinson, whose sons were among the consignees, refused to let the tea ships leave without unloading and paying the Townshend duty. On November 29, Samuel Adams convened a mass meeting to stop the unloading of the ship Dartmouth.
Thousands gathered over several meetings. British law required the ship to, well, pay duties or unload its cargo within 20 days, but the governor blocked any resolution. By December 16th, two more ships, the Eleanor and Beaver, had joined Dartmouth in the harbor. And that evening, a group of 30 to 130 men, which is a pretty big swing if you stop and think about it. Some were disguised as Mohawk warriors, and they boarded the ships and dumped 340 chests of tea into the Boston harbor. And this was worth 9,000 euros, which is basically over 1.7 million in today's money.
Jeez. When the Sons of Liberty stormed Boston Harbor on December 16th, 1773, they weren't just tossing crates of tea. They were crafting a spectacle. Dressed in makeshift costumes meant to resemble Mohawk Indians, the protesters aimed to send a message. They were no longer loyal subjects of the British crown, but natural men, aligned with the land, resisting imperial control. The disguise was theatrical, symbolic, and strategic, but it also raises uncomfortable questions about appropriation and erasure.
So the choice of Mohawk identity wasn't random. In colonial immigration, Native Americans symbolized freedom, resistance, and, well, a primal connection to the land, which were qualities the protesters wanted to embody as they rejected British authority. By adopting these disguises, they really sought to distance themselves and be, rebellious, a new American identity, if you will, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right?
Something like that.
Yeah, okay.
The disguise also offered anonymity, shielding participants from legal repercussions and allowing the act to stand as a collective, mythic gesture rather than an individual crime. But this symbolic act came at a cost. The colonists' portrayal of the native identity was crude and caricatured. Face paint, blankets, whooping cries, and improvised tomahawks. It really was not a tribute to indigenous culture, but a theatrical mask that flattened and distorted it. The real Mohawk people had their own political agendas and complex relationships with both the British and the colonists.
So basically, what you're trying to say is we don't condone it today. We didn't condone it back then.
It definitely was not a portrayal, and it really would have shined more of a negative light that they really didn't need shined on them at the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, we really can't say anything about that time because we weren't there. But I think it was more so to conceal their identity.
Yeah, I don't think it was meant to
Yeah, I don't either.
that fluffy stuff. I was like, yeah, no.
Right. But their voices were not part of the protest. Instead, their identity was borrowed, simplified, and used as a tool of colonial resistance. This act of appropriation, well, it really highlights a deeper tension in the American Revolution. While colonists fought for liberty, they often sidelined or misrepresented the very indigenous nations whose lands they occupied. And the Tea Party's use of native imagery, well, it really helped forge a new American identity, but it did so by, you know, portraying indigenous people in rather a very dim light and not really including them, but excluding them.
Right. Today the image of Mohawk disguised patriots remains iconic, but it also invites reflection. It reminds us that even in moments of righteous rebellion, the lines between symbolism and exploitation were really blurred. And that the stories we celebrate often leave others unheard. This symbolic act of defiance became known as the Boston Tea Party.
Later in March of 1774, the Sons of Liberty, well, they destroyed the remaining tea from another ship that, well, they had previously ran aground and whose tea had been stored or sold in Boston. Whether or not Samuel Adams helped plan the Boston Tea Party is really still out to be debated. But he did defend the event, portraying it as a principled stand to protect constitutional rights rather than an act of lawlessness.
John Adams, his cousin and fellow founding father, described the destruction of the tea as a bold and historic moment, calling it a turning point in the struggle for American liberty. In Britain, the reaction was swift and unified across political lines, even among those sympathetic to colonial concerns. Parliament responded with the Intolerable Acts, a series of punitive measures aimed mainly at Massachusetts, though their implications alarmed all the colonies.
These acts were widely seen as violations of colonial charters and natural rights, further galvanizing resistance across America. Economically, the East India Company, well, it suffered significant losses from destroyed tea, and this was valued roughly at around about 9,000 British pounds back in the day, which would be about 1.7 million today. Benjamin Franklin, well, he suggested the company be repaid, and a group of New York merchants even offered compensation, but the British government refused. Mm.
Indeed. The Boston Tea Party inspired similar acts of protest by demonstrating the power of direct collective action against British policies. One notable example was the burning of Peggy Stewart in Annapolis, Maryland in October 1774. The ship had arrived with the cargo that included tax tea, and after public outrage erupted, its owner, under pressure from angry colonists, burned the ship and its cargo to avoid further conflict. This act mirrored the spirit of resistance shown in Boston and reflected the growing unity and defiance among the colonies.
These acts of protest, well, they were a shift from isolated acts of dissent to a broader revolutionary movement, helping to accelerate the colonies toward open rebellion and eventually the American Revolutionary War. Although Britain attempted conciliation by repealing the Tea Act in 1778 and passing the Conciliatory Resolution in 1775, the revolutionary momentum, it had already gained enough momentum and it was starting to become very strong.
Today, the Boston Tea Party is commemorated at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum, which features replicas of the original ships, Eleanor and Beaver, in intricate exhibits, and one of the only surviving tea chests from the event.
I gotta go.
That sounds awesome. Road
Field
trip.
trip, yeah. Every time we
At this
do a
point, we
show,
just need to rent a couple of RVs and travel the US.
what we need to do is book some shows so that our fans can see us along the way.
Yes,
And if you want us to come to your town, send us an email.
absolutely. If you would like to support this podcast,
Tell a friend and help get the word out.
and as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or just tuned in, Kat and I say thank you, the listener.
You can join the Facebook group and Info on the Go.
Hold on, wait a minute. We forgot to tell our fans how to support the show. You can do so by clicking on one of the sponsor links or at Patreon. On Facebook, you can share with us your show ideas or just ask Kat and I a question.
Yeah. Follow us wherever you get your podcast.
Send us a text using the link in the show notes or leave a review. Leaving that review really does help others find us. You can also email us at
Info on the Go podcast at gmail.com. And
yes, that is all one word. You can find that link in the show notes. Till next time.
stay curious.
Every morning starts with a choice. Don't settle for just coffee. Rise up with strong coffee. Meet the world's strongest cup of joe. Strong isn't just a drink, it's a movement. And strong stands for striving to reach our natural greatness.
Born from one simple need to be better. They rebuilt coffee from the ground up, infusing organic coffee with collagen, protein, nootropics, and functional ingredients that fuel your body and sharpen your mind. There's no crash, no compromises, just clean energy, focus, and flavor that fires you up.
Whether you're chasing kids, chasing goals, or chasing greatness, don't just wake up, rise up. Strong coffee, the world's strongest cup of joe, for a world ready to be better.
Use code INFOGO at checkout to save 15%.